very, it was about gender, and for like many of the delegates are white male in positions of power, and that's probably the last place they wanted to be.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's just so necessary.
It's almost like, if I was president, I would love to pass a policy almost like community service. Like everybody has to do, 100 hours a year of community service, and then you could give men the specific types, to kind of construct a way for them to be in those spaces, but
No, because it's so healthy.
Yeah.
And uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe next conference I'll organize a session on how to get white males in the room to talk about gender. See what happens.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the major disaster of the past 6 months. So your president, not your president, we talked about disasters creating opportunities for change and for people to mobilize and to become more engaged. How do you see that playing out in America after the election of Donald Trump?
I think it's been a huge mobilizer and motivator, for sure. I mean, and we are the majority, those of us that are in the resistance, if you will. I think it's important to note things like, I think there were 4 times more people at the Women's March in DC than there were at the inauguration, just for example. And I think that statistic alone really tells the story, that the vast majority of people in this country are not supportive of this administration, even though I think Trump's approval ratings are much higher than you would expect. So that's concerning too. So obviously there are plenty though of people in this country for whom this is the perfect president for them. And so in many ways it's mobilized a lot of people, and so that's been great. It's mobilized a lot of people in support of Trump too, and that's been really hard, but also really interesting. And I'm trusting that it's going to be good in the end. So on something like racism in particular, I think that obviously this country is literally built on racism, and continues to be built on racism, and racism in and of itself is such a core thread through our entire history and our entire culture, and obviously to this day. And I think those of us especially that are, white progressives doing a lot of work around these issues, and we have our own bubble, right? And in California especially, have sort of been allowed to feel that, sure, of course we know some people are still racist, and we understand that I'm sure, have our own kernels of systemic racism within our own selves and those types of things. I think we've really intellectualized it. And this election season has really illuminated how widespread, how deep, how troubling, how raw and rude and basic and clear many people, how the racism of many people in this country still really is. And how energizing it is for them too. Like, this is still a big issue for a lot of people. And that's so scary and so terrifying. And I wonder if it really blossoming out this way is a part of it. I want to say finally, although we'll probably never be to a finally, but maybe really dealing with it in a more meaningful way that we can start to heal it more. Although, I was just listening to Aziz Ansari, he's a comedian, and he was talking about it, saying how kind of how people are talking like what I just said, like it's great that people at least now are being honest about their racism and it's open, and he's saying, no, go back to being quiet about your racism. It's not working for me. So that's true too, and he's a person of color, so I would trust him for sure on that. But in terms of mobilizing actions and activists, though, on the other side, I think it's been huge. It's been the biggest thing I've ever seen in my lifetime, which is interesting because I feel like climate change itself is such a huge issue that it should be that motivator, but it just hasn't been. And obviously it's just a little too abstract for people. The human brain isn't built to understand fully or to feel that kind of slow threat. We really are built for the fight or flight of the tiger approaching us, and that's really what somebody like Trump represents. He's obviously a clear person that we can understand is a direct threat to us, and so I think he's definitely motivated a lot of people to get involved.
And so, do you think that that more people are actually questioning some of the systemic problems because now it's kind of explicit and they're being challenged to think, well, that's really affecting people, and to look beyond just the president to look at systemic issues?
So I think what's clear is that people are really concerned. So you see a lot of people coming up, I'm concerned about Trump in some way. And then what happens is, then there's a lot of problems organizing all those people in a way that's effective. That's what I'm personally struggling with right now as a movement leader. You have a lot of new people coming in that have a lot of passion and energy, but don't have a lot of experience. Then you have sort of the opposite group of people, maybe even from the 60s, that feel like they've been doing it forever, whether they have or not, and have an approach that they feel really connected to and don't want to let go of. And then you have people that really want to focus on the federal level. You have people that want to focus on one single payer healthcare issue people. And you have a lot of energy. And I have found right now the real struggle is organizing that in a way that's effective. And I have not found the perfect answer. Right now, we are on our local level. We're definitely having a struggle with our progressives movement, organizing it, keeping people engaged, not frustrating people, that kind of thing. It's so big, though, that it's probably unmanageable. So the fact that some people will drop off for whatever reason, I think is actually probably positive. So that to me right now is the struggle, is taking this great amount of people and amount of energy and managing it in a way that's effective. And so I guess I would have to say I don't know if people really understand the bigger systemic, deeper issues. I don't always hear conversations about that. I hear conversations, and I participate in it too, that are much more, that feel less sophisticated and less, I guess, mature, I would say, than that. Like, I think I personally am feeling, and I hear it in a lot of other people's voices too, like for me, I feel so betrayed and disappointed by the Democratic Party that I'm having a personal struggle really getting over that and through that. I'm really hanging on to that. I know it, I admit it. My anger and frustration actually is much more directed towards that party than it is towards the federal administration, because I feel like they are responsible for that outcome. I agree. I think Bernie Sanders said it as well, that Donald Trump did not win this election. The Democratic Party lost it. And so I think that's why I feel more energized against them, even though I still remain in the party, than I do about Donald Trump. I guess I feel like that's where the opportunity is too. And I guess I feel some kind of sense of ownership around the Democratic Party too, that this is my party, I'm in this party. I thought it was the party of the good guys, and I feel betrayed by them. So, and I hear a lot of that level of conversation. I think there's a lot of hurt people that are having a hard time getting past that thing that hurt them to get to some of these bigger issues that you're talking about.
So, obviously a big reason why things stay the way they are is because of money in politics.
Uh-huh.
So how do we go about challenging that?
I think everybody acknowledges that, and nobody wants to do anything about it. I just gave a speech actually to our progressives group where it was trying to give them some clarity about the deep problems of the Democratic Party and how, because there's this real call from the Democratic Party for unity. And you only hear that from the establishment people. You don't hear that, in my experience, from what might be called the Bernie-crats or the more socially progressive people. And when I hear that call for unity, what I really hear is, that's enough, sit down and be quiet, and unify with us, with our values, which are not, by the way, getting money out of politics, which are not, by the way, universal health care, and all these other which are not, by the way, free college for young people, those kind of things. As far as I can see, the values of the Democratic Party are the Democratic Party. And all they seem to really care about is getting a Democrat in office, not getting a good person in office. And being a good Democrat is better than being a good person. And so the money in politics serves them as much as it does anybody else. And it's such a tough issue, obviously, because everybody in office is there because of money in politics. And it makes it really challenging for them to be the ones to move away from that when they put their own money at risk, their own re-elections at risk. But you do see a lot of movement around it. At the local level, there's movement around it in my community, trying to get local efforts on that issue. So I don't know if it's like some issues where they start locally and they grow across the United States, like maybe a gay marriage, when you see that coming state by state, maybe you could see that happening with money in politics. Yeah, I mean, that's obviously the core problem of the whole system.
Yeah. So how important is it for people to run for office against people who are accepting corporate money?
How important is it?
Yeah.
It's really important. I mean, I think there's some hope with the democratization of media, that an outsider candidate with not as much money could have a viable campaign. I think you did see that to a certain extent with Bernie Sanders. I think he showed another model of money in politics and what that can mean, you know, with his average donation of $27, which is a whole new way of doing it and the way it should be. Like, you're going to always have some money involved, right? But it's the amount of money from the amount of people. So you have a very small amount of people giving a large amount of money. Obviously, they're in a control position and they have access. You know, if I gave $27 to Bernie, I'm sure he appreciates it, but that's not going to give me any extra access than all the other thousands or millions of people that did the same thing, which is how it should be. So I think we're at a time where there is that possibility. And I think it's so, people are so sick of the bullshit, basically, of the whole system, that I think if you had a real value-based, honest, open candidate that was interesting and energizing, that person would have a real chance, I think, of winning against another candidate that was more traditional, in the more traditional political model with a lot of money.
Cool. One more question. So with all, obviously you got into this because of your care about environmental causes and your concern for future generations. So when you think about those issues and you think about all the evidence of the trajectory that we're on, are you hopeful that we are going to change course? We are going to do what has to be done to preserve the only planet that we have for future generations?
I'm generally hopeful. I mean, I think that, we know that the apocalypse has already come for many, many people in this world. Now, and some of them in the United States. I mean, I think when you look at a Hurricane Sandy or even a Hurricane Katrina, the apocalypse came for some already. And then when you look across the world and you look at Bangladesh or the Maldives or even what's happening in Syria, while you can't hold climate change 100% accountable for the Syrian crisis, it's pretty clear that it's definitely exacerbated. So the apocalypse has come for those people already. So that's already happening. So so I guess I say that because I want to acknowledge that the people that have done the least to contribute are already being hit first and worst. Again, people of color, generally speaking. I think for those of us in the United States and in the West in general, and just by the gift of not only our economy but also our geography, have a much clearer opportunity to turn it around in a way that's going to be meaningful for us. And I think that we will be able to do that. I think we really are at a precipice of that big shift. I think what is her name? Anyway, she calls it the Great Turning. And it's this moment of really turning so many things around. And I do think that we'll be able to make some meaningful changes, and that those of us here will be fortunate enough, I think, to be able to create a sustainable way of being. And it might look a lot different, and I'm sure it will, than it does now. I mean, you know, and in many ways, I don't want to romanticize that future at all, but I can see it being in some ways like cultures have been in the past that may have some challenges that we're not used to, but also will have some real positive outcomes that we're also not used to. I mean, so many of the problems that we're facing, and climate change in particular, climate change is really about being disconnected. You know, disconnected, having to use fossil fuels to get one place to another, to fly home, to drive to work, and consumption, you know, and consumption is so much driven by really disconnection too. And so I think that what climate change has the chance of doing, though, is bringing us, for survival, closer together. And I think that hopefully will create a lot more positive connections for people that will be really meaningful.
So, like, on a human level, like, what do you see anything changing in how people relate to each other? At that, you know, at that attitude level, in terms of their behaviors towards others, to kind of step away from that consumption-based life to a life that's around values and shared interests and shared vision.
I do. I mean, you see that, and I'm sure you've seen it in your work, when there is an actual real disaster that's happened. You know, you saw that in Hurricane Sandy, where immediately, basically, people understand there's a huge problem, and you just start trying to solve it and remedy what can be remedied and mitigate what can be mitigated and adapt to what can't be mitigated. And the communities really come together, generally speaking, in those moments. And it can be a really beautiful thing for communities. And I think what maybe you're trying to address, and I think what I'm trying to address and we're working towards, is how can we create that without that disaster happening first? Or how can we create that with the understanding that we are in the middle of a disaster and that we are ultimately, you know, this thing that we've kind of been told all our lives that maybe we never really resonated with at all, but we're all in this together. And as Americans, we really resist that. We have such a strong drive around our individuality and our individual strengths and our individual success and our pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps and all of that. But what we're seeing more and more is that we are really all connected in a way that we're all going down or up together ultimately. And so I'm hopeful that in my own community that I have been able to have success around creating more connection in my community and building what I would call resiliency. You know, we're really in a time where that's the key word I think that we need, sustainability, but also, you know, resiliency. And those emotional and community bonds really are a huge part of that.
Awesome. Well, Heidi, I could talk to you for hours. But, and you almost made me cry at points, so held it together. But that was beautiful. Thank you.
Oh yeah, well, thank you guys. What time is it? It's time for boxing?
It's 25 past.
Oh, good. We're great.
Yeah.
Do you need anything else from me, or?
We'll take
Nope.
some still photos.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's okay.
Yeah.